So today we're going to be looking at taking code that looks like this with a bunch of jumbled up if statements and turning it into something else. We're going to be turning that code into something that looks like this. It's a lot cleaner and easier to read, and while it may seem tedious to come back in and clean code like this up, I'm going to give you 3 simple steps to help you improve your ability to refactor code like this. So the code that we're working with must meet the following criteria. The user must be logged in, the store must sell the item in question, the store must have that item in stock, and the user must have enough money provided to buy the item. And for each of these distinct requirements, the application should be generating a different message from the purchase method. So in order to look at that, we have our items array here that has 2 items in it with a name, quantity available, and price. Let's go right ahead and jump into refactoring this code the way that we need it to be. Let's begin refactoring these if statements to get them in a form that's more readable. When you're writing code like this, it's really easy to focus in on the positive scenarios or the primary scenarios. In this case, the primary scenario is I'm going to purchase this item, the ultimate end goal action we want to get to, but in order to get there, we have to validate all these different criteria, like the user's logged in, the store sells this item, the item is in stock, and the user's providing enough money. And the intuitive thing for a human to do in this case is to say, okay, I'm going to check all these things are positive, and if that's the case, yes, this person can buy it, instead of trying to look at it the other way and say, well, the user's not logged in, they can't buy this item. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at flipping this logic, bailing out for the negative case, and not work our way down to the primary case the way we're doing it right now. So the first thing to do here is let's go ahead and establish our end goal. Our end goal is to get rid of this if and this else, and we want this official purchase message saying the item was purchased to go at the bottom of the purchase function. So we go ahead and move that down to the bottom. So we want to get here, and we want all the logic that checks to see that's not met to go up here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to verify that the user's logged in. It's what we were doing here, right? But instead of checking to see if it's positive, we're going to check to see if it's negative. So if not user is logged in. And if that's the case, we're going to go ahead and tell the user, hey, you can't buy this because you're not logged in. And so the beauty of this is once I get past this if statement up here with the user is logged in check, I know for the entirety of this function that we are logged in, because if we were not logged in, we'd have already bailed out of the function up here. And so all this code right here can go away. I no longer need the else, and I no longer need this if check up here for is logged in. So the concept here is let's bail out early, and most importantly, let's get rid of all these nests here. When you're writing if statements like this, I would recommend trying to avoid getting above 2 layers of nesting. So 2 layers of nesting would be one if statement with another one inside of it. What it's basically saying here is if the item is sold at this store, then we want to continue down to our logic. So let's go ahead and refactor this like we did before. So we're going to take the if, instead of saying if item, we're going to say if not item. So we're flipping the logic, and at that point we will have invalidated that this store sells that item, so we can give them that error message. And then again, like we did with the is user logged in, we no longer need this logic here. Once we get to this point down here, we know that this item sold here because of the fact that we check that up here. Let's continue with this similar concept for quantity available. And so instead of checking greater than 0, we're going to check and see if we don't have it in stock. And if we don't have it in stock, we're going to return that error message that says it's out of stock. And like we did before, we're getting rid of yet another layer of if nest. So we have one last thing to figure out here, and that is whether or not we have enough money to purchase the item. And so we want to check and see if we do not have enough money. So to do that, we're going to say if item.price is greater than provided money. And if that's the case, we're going to go ahead and return that other error message. And so now you see this logic here is no longer doing anything. So we can go ahead and delete it. So we're looking a lot cleaner here, but there's a couple other things that I want to show you. One thing I'm not particularly happy with is I don't like this not item. I feel like it's not as readable as it could be. So let's go ahead and introduce another variable and say is item sold here. And so what this will do is this will just make it easier to read. So instead of saying is not item, I can say if not is item sold here. And so it's a little bit easier to read. And so this is just teaching you the concept of it's okay to take a variable name and have that represent what's happening in your logic, because a lot of times that's going to make it easier for you to read. And more importantly, it's going to make it easier for other people to read as well. And then one last little thing that I'd like to do here is we've introduced a variable to make it a little bit more readable. Well, let's write a helper function that determines whether something is in stock. So let's do that. And so this function right here can now be used to represent this logic. So if not is item in stock, we pass in the item. This really is not necessary. The code worked just fine, but it makes it just a little bit easier to read. The point of this video was to show you different techniques to clean up your if statements. The first one was to bail early. The second is to declare clear variable names for logic. And the third is to break out into helper methods that make it easier to read. This is not by any means an exhaustive list on how to improve your if statements, but it should be a pretty good starting point. If you disagree or have comments, feel free to check out the comments section below and make sure to like and subscribe.